turn off my.
Are they really? They are. They're so good. Huh. What makes them different?
Chair.
Everybody ready? Are we live? I'd like to call this meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Dewey,
Present.
Commissioner Ellison,
Here.
Commissioner Gay,
Here.
Commissioner Hunter,
Here.
Commissioner Stewart,
Here.
Commissioner Stockdale,
Here.
Commissioner Strange,
Here.
Commissioner Davis here, Commissioner Bryan,
Here.
all present and accounted for.
Thank you. The meeting is now called to order at 2 p.m. A quorum of members is present. Ms. Womack, could we have a verification of the meeting, please?
The agenda was published and posted on July 7th, amended on and reposted on July 11th, and amended and reposted on July 12th. That's all I have, Chair.
And what correspondence do you have, please?
And the submission by Dr. Michael Trejos of the effects of earth soil liquefaction on structural stability and integrity of buildings, pedestrians, sidewalks, and roadways.
Thank you. The purpose of today's meeting is continuation of the preliminary review of the site plan review for application number 1221-05 Belhaven property. And I see you have a team here. As a matter of reminder to the members of the commission and the public that's here today or viewing, we are just at the preliminary review stage of this process. The purpose of today's meeting is to receive preliminary input from city officials, nearby property owners, and the public. We are here to determine whether additional information is needed from the applicant or others, and whether there are legal or factual issues that need further clarification prior to final action. This is not a public hearing, it's a public meeting. Issues that may be appropriate for discussion today, including questions about the commission concerning this application and whether or not it meets city code, and to gather additional information that we may deem necessary. Mr. Janis, I think I'll take this out of order a bit. If I could ask you for your building inspector's report first.
Thank you, Chair. We have not officially issued anything, but I would like to speak about the drawings that were submitted May 17th, which I assume you have copies of. After reviewing, I did find some instances that need to be clarified, if you will.
Yes, sir.
So in particular, it comes down to, obviously the parking is an issue, from what I can still tell. Some of the spaces are not the required correct size to be counted as parking spaces according to 270-30. The size of parking spaces is required in A to be 162 square feet. There are a couple listed as compact spaces that are not 162 square feet. So I'm not sure that, well, it obviously does not meet that code requirement. We do have still some percentages that are still off on the various floors going up through the levels of the allowable coverages. What I have calculated is obviously on first floor is 100%, second floor is 84%, third floor is 57%, and fourth floor is 61%. As far as the rest is concerned, a little changed from the previous submissions that we have before us today, other than, of course, the addition of the second floor, if you will, parking structure and the removal of the 19 Baltimore parking. And from the review of that, that is pretty much what I have found to be different or still lacking in information on.
Will you be issuing an updated report?
Yes,
for
sir,
the
I will.
Planning Commission?
Yes, sir, I will.
And when you talk about the second floor of parking, you're talking about underground parking?
Correct. So negative second floor, if you will.
All right. Okay, all right, sir. Anyone, any questions of the building inspector at this point? We may come back and ask others. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Excuse me.
Julie, speak into your mic, please.
I'm sorry. We're sharing this. I have a question for Mr. Janis concerning, I think it was your June 28th letter, which to the applicant, in which you stated that no loading berth would be required for the commercial space. Now, I'm sure that you are familiar with Code Section 27021C, which has a table of parking, of loading berth requirements by use.
Absolutely.
And the applicant's plans, it's page A0101S in the copy that I have, but it is the ground floor plan, has several tables on it that show various uses for the property. And the first table shows that retail there's cafe, circulation, kitchen, et cetera. Retail is 19,699 square feet. The table below that shows hotel only at 14,713 square feet. Below that is restaurant only, 3,981 square feet. But below that is a table that says retail only, and that's 19,699 square feet. Now, is it your understanding that for purposes of calculating the requirement for purposes of a loading berth for the retail, that your letter says it's not necessary because that retail will be in 4 different places? Is it your understanding that that retail space that's shown on the plan is a final drawing, that the applicant is locked into having those 4 retail units at exactly those dimensions?
Thank you. As with any design, there's an ebb and flow to the design process, so those spaces could be manipulated further. However, the uses could be something that is not of retail. It certainly could be a restaurant. It certainly could be any other use put in those areas that may not have any parking requirements.
But Section 27021C talks about retail uses, commercial establishments, and so forth, a single use. As of these plans, as of today, the retail-only use that is shown on the plans, and it's retail only, is a single use. And as Mr. Forston's letter from May 17th pointed out, when the code speaks in terms of a use, it's a singular use. And on that basis, do you still hold by your statement that no loading berth is required for that almost 20,000 square feet of a single retail use?
I do. Again, I'm viewing the plans that have been submitted to me. It would be erroneous for me to speculate what those uses are going to be if they're not identified. Right now, they are commercial spaces. Being that they're labeled retail, we can assume that they are retail, but they are split up into several different units, and historically, and several other representations across our city have several retail spaces in a single building, and they do not require a loading berth for those retail spaces.
Well, are you familiar with the First Street Station development?
I am.
Which years ago, your prior building inspector in the city required the developer to provide a loading berth for those commercial establishments within that single building on that single site?
I am familiar with First Street Station, yes, ma'am.
And what distinguishes this situation from First Street Station?
Yeah, We don't know when it was approved. We don't know what the code was. I certainly didn't look at the documents myself, so I have no knowledge of the application and what the history of that application was, nor the decisions that were made by the building official at that time.
Well, is it fair to ask you for when we meet again that you would have that information?
Absolutely.
Look, I don't know what the relevance is to some other establishment within the city. I mean, he's given a city code that he's entitled to interpret. He's interpreted it in the context of this application. That's what's,
Mr. Mandalis, I can't hear you. Would you speak?
I'm sorry. I guess what I was saying is that the First Street Station, it exists within the city, but I'm not sure that it has any precedent value or binding effect upon what his interpretation is, given the code that he's given now and the plans that he's given now. So while I think other examples of construction projects within the city can inform decisions, I don't think there's any precedential value that's binding upon his decision here. And again, we don't know what code was in place at that time or what the thinking was at the time. I mean, he's made a decision based upon the code that he's given.
Are you saying that code interpretation can vary from project to project? That's what you just said.
It can certainly vary from building official to building official and from, codes. I'm sure you would agree codes are not perfect. And there are many areas that end up being interpreted from time to time. I don't know whether this is the code that was in place when First Street Station was approved or not, but, we're doing our best job and he's doing his best job to ensure that the decisions we make in the context of this project are the best possible decisions we can arrive at, and, we're
So is it fair to
calling
say
balls and
that
strikes.
the decision in this June 28th letter does not take into consideration precedent or prior applications of code language?
No, I don't think so. 'Cause I think that
Well, that seems to be what you just said.
I think that as I said also, that some of these other decisions inform the decisions being made here, but ultimately where a code can be interpreted without having to bring in past decisions that don't have a binding precedential effect, I think the best approach is to take the code you're given and interpret it as best you can.
Well, I don't think the code that we have now speaks to the particular question of how retail space is divided up in a preliminary plan. So I would ask, did this opinion in the June 28th letter take into consideration, and if so, how, the application of the code to the First Street Station?
It did not.
Okay.
And Mr. Mandalis, do you agree that the recommendations or observations or opinions of the building inspector are not binding on this commission?
No, I disagree.
Do you disagree?
Yes.
Okay. As a matter of law?
And actually, I'm not going to say more about that because that goes to legal opinion, and your attorney will tell you what's binding, what's not binding. But I guess I'll stop there.
Well, do you have a basis in law for that?
I'm not going to comment anymore on a legal opinion.
Mr. Mandalis, I have one more question, and that is it not a basic principle of administrative law that the interpretation of an agency as to its own enabling legislation and authorizing legislation is a very material fact in dealing with interpretations of that specific code, how it's been interpreted in the past by the agency that administers it?
I guess what are we trying to get at? I mean, I feel like we're being interrogated here. If there's a question you have that about his letter and you think it's wrong in some way,
That was
just
a
say
yes
it
or
and put it
no
on the record.
question.
I'm sorry?
That was a yes or no question.
I don't care to answer questions that go to legal opinion.
It would help us to, you said that other opinions, prior developments could help inform our decision-making. So whether you think it's precedent or not, we'd like to know how it was handled before in a similar situation, whether the code was the same then or different. It just so helps us come to a decision, is this a like situation or is it a different situation? That's what we're seeking, because ultimately we're going to be asked to make decisions on a number of issues that are questionable in terms of whether they meet code or not.
I can appreciate that. Perhaps, we'll see, this is all publicly available. What we would do is we'd review the minutes from years ago whenever First Street Station was approved. We'd look at the minutes, we'd look at any legislation that was in place at the time versus what's in place now. And these are all exercises that can be done by anybody, frankly. And I'm not, sure that the building official's time is best used doing that when, again, it doesn't have precedential value. I think when you're in a situation where you're saying, I'm not sure how this code should be interpreted, then I think it does inform your decision to go look at how other building officials have approached a similar situation. But I don't think in any instance those prior decisions of a former building official are binding precedent upon the current building official.
What if they were upheld by a court? I urge you to look at the Neon Oyster case.
If the statute has not changed, then I would say, yeah, that's binding upon the current
Okay,
building
then I
official.
urge you to look at the Neon Oyster case. That's all I'll say.
So you're unclear about the precedential effect of prior applications of this.
I'm
Let
not
me ask-
unclear. They have no binding precedential effect.
I didn't say binding. I said precedential effect. I'm looking at an interpretation by the building inspector that seems to not take it into consideration at all, which is what you just confirmed.
Correct.
So I have another question about the loading berth to Mr. Janis. In your April 10th letter, you said there's a discrepancy between the area of the hotel provided by the applicant and that calculated by the building inspector. This is on the page with regard to loading and unloading. Using the building inspector's calculations, the area is over 100,000 square feet. Therefore, 2 berths will be required. Your June 28th private letter did not reference that. Is that still your opinion?
With recently reviewed documents submitted May 17th, I have found that the square footages, through manipulation of floor plans, I would imagine, are down below the 100,000 square foot for the hotel. I will be listing that in my letter when I issue that.
All right, and will you explain what you mean by, in your letter, what you mean by manipulation?
Revisions is a better word, that's right.
Well, those are two very different words.
Right, the revisions for the drawing set.
Well, I hope you will point out the specific places that there were either revisions or whatever other word might apply.
I certainly wasn't the designer, but I can speculate probably to where those revisions may have happened, but I wasn't the designer of the building.
Lauren, good.
I wanted to just add a comment to the previous discussion. When the building official and I were collaborating on the letter back in, let's see, that was dated April 10th, with the discussion about the loading berths. Or at least my reasoning for the discussion about not needing a berth for the retail spaces goes back to the discussion we had about not needing parking for those retail spaces, in that the Planning Commission had made a decision that the retail spaces be looked at individually, and since none of them individually were 15,000 square feet, they did not require their own parking spaces. So using that same logic, that was my rationale. And that goes also back to the discussion that we had had at previous Planning Commission meetings related to the discussions about revising the commercial parking standards. So in that similar vein, I had used that similar logic to apply that to the loading berth situation, and trying to treat using the same logic in all aspects of this application.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you were using the rationale, the purposes, and so forth related to parking.
Yes.
To come to this conclusion relating to loading and unloading berths, is that correct?
Correct, and not using this different standards, if you will, for the same type of use space.
Well, the loading berths and parking are very different, but we're talking about retail space.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
All right. And to just clarify one other point, I did not see your signature on the June 28th letter.
I was not part of that discussion or the composition of the letter.
And is that true with regard to everyone at your office?
That is correct.
Thank you.
I just have one more request for Lauren. Would you and your colleagues, Wallace Montgomery as the city's planning consultants, would you please take a look at section 270-36 and read that very carefully and be prepared to come back and tell us why parking, what the treatment of parking for those individual spaces should not be, should be equated with the same policy and planning goals that loading berths require. I think you'll find that it's two very different purposes for requiring loading berths rather than how you allocate parking places.
I do not disagree with that statement. However, the discussion at the Planning Commission meetings where we had discussed commercial parking wanted to disaggregate, keep the retail spaces disaggregated. So just going off that discussion, we just took that approach.
And I can understand that, and I know we had that discussion, and I know we decided that as a matter of policy, for purposes of parking for individual retail units within a given building or establishment, we were not going to require, and the city really never has, required individual parking places for individual retail units. But my point is, that's parking. We're talking loading berths and the policies and purposes of loading berths. And I would think we would suggest that they're very different and would like you to look at it again, please.
Yes, you might want to consider that First Street Station does not have any requirement of parking spaces for the individual retail units, but there is a loading berth for those units.
Mr. Janis, is there anything else to your report, sir?
There is not. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. City planner, anything to add?
Not at this time.
So we do not have an updated building inspector's report or a city planner's report as to the May 17th plans filed by Belhaven. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Janis, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. This project has had a bit of history before the Planning Commission, and Ms. Gay, can you perhaps just review briefly the history of this application?
Yeah, I'll make this brief because this is a document that's been given to all of the planning commissioners up here. But first of all, Matt, I appreciate your preliminary feedback on the May 17th drawings. That's very helpful. And I guess I just want to confirm that you have not done a full level of calculations yet, like verified all the square foot, because you've had a number of plans submitted. Is that right?
So if I may.
Yes, please.
These plans were submitted as a request from me during the May 12th meeting when they presented these plans at first. Because of that, we didn't feel that it was a true full submission.
Right, okay.
And so that just recently, I did a quick calculation on the square footages, and it was what I was able to do with other planning commission submittal applications in the time that is allotted to me.
Right, but are you going to be doing another level of review? In other words, you have not completed your review of them yet, right?
Correct. Yeah, I've done a quick cursory look
Right.
of the areas that I knew questions were raised from the original submittals.
Right.
And so I verified if those were changed or modified or in any way.
Okay.
And I've not drilled down to the intricate details as of yet.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is that it mentioned at the last meeting, in fact, it was even picked up in an article in the paper, that the plans were pretty much the same as they'd always been. And actually, I believe Mike Strange and I are the only ones who have been here at the very beginning and are here now. And I thought it would be useful to review, because I do understand that it would be a waste of your time to go through calculations of plans that are changing. And that, so I did, for the benefit of our newer planning commission, basically a timeline starting with the April 12th, 2019 meeting and going into the May meeting. And this is the 7th presentation of the plans. And what I also did as part of the timeline was to include relevant legislation. For instance, when the plans first came to us, underground parking was still counted as far, and of course we changed when I was on the commission, we changed that, so that obviously benefited them quite a lot, and I put the Board of Adjustment hearings on here as well. But one of the things that jumped out at me is just how much they have changed over time. The room count ranging anywhere from 100 to 125, there being no loading berth at all in the first 2 years of the plans. The parking going from on-site to off-site to back on-site, and significantly, the retail space expanding over 40%. That when it was first proposed, the retail space was less than 14,000 square feet, and now it's nearly 20, which is great. That's a wonderful development. But I think it does speak to the need to provide you with final plans that are considered final, so that you have something concrete to measure, right? Okay.
All right, thank you. We're at the point where, does the applicant have any presentation or statement before the commission?
I have a lot of statements. And I'll start with some of the things that you were talking about just now, since they're fresh in everybody's mind. But for the record, my name is Richard Forston, and I'm an attorney, live just south of Middletown, and I'm representing the Papa John family and the various entities that are the applicant. And it is good to see you all here on a Friday in Rehoboth, because to my mind, there's nothing better than being in Rehoboth on a Friday in the summer. And this room, at least, is air conditioned. I worked up quite a sweat just walking the couple blocks to get here. As you all know, we had a meeting in May, and you asked us a series of questions and asked us to get back to you in writing, and we did that. In addition, Mr. Janis offered his opinion, which as building inspector and the person who interprets and enforces the zoning code is binding. And so he's offered his opinion on a couple of things, which reinforces and I would think affirms the things that we said at our May meeting about our plan. And then in addition, there was also the Board of Adjustment issued its written decision for, I'll say, the other hotel project at 1 Rehoboth, which had some language in it that I think is common sense, and again reinforces what we said in response to questions that you all asked. Now, I know there was just a lot of conversation about a project, the First Street Station project. For all I know, and for all anybody on this planning commission knows, that developer chose to put in a loading dock. He chose to do it. And it makes sense, perhaps, for that project that there would be a loading dock, because otherwise there might not be any loading dock at all. Here, as you know, there's already one loading dock. And as we talked about at our May meeting, to the extent that the stores on the boardwalk and the stores on Rehoboth Avenue want to use and take advantage of that loading dock, they will be welcome to do so. But this is not a case, although your code doesn't require it. A 4,000 square foot store doesn't require a loading dock. A 4,000 square foot store doesn't require a loading dock. A 10,000 square foot store doesn't require a loading dock. And these are all separate spaces. They're all intended to be separate spaces. They all are essentially going to still be the stores that are there now that we all like and enjoy and are part of the boardwalk experience. They don't have loading docks now. None of them do. And yet they seem to function just fine. And in fact, now, as a result of this project, there will be a loading dock for those stores. And, I think Mr. Janis was right in his letter, and I think Mr. Mandelis was right in his statement. We always start with what the code actually says. And the code says here that a retail or service establishment or other commercial use with over 15,000 square feet of gross floor area requires a loading dock. That's why you don't see loading docks at every store up and down Rehoboth Avenue, because by and large, they're all less than 15,000 square feet in size. And here, we're going to have a number of establishments and a number of commercial uses, plural. They're all going to be less than 15,000 square feet. So just reading the zoning code and understanding how what it means and reading that language, no loading dock, no second loading dock is required. And of course, to the extent there was any doubt about that, Delaware case law and the Delaware Supreme Court has said zoning codes are interpreted in favor of the property owner. So I don't really understand why we're still arguing about that. I think it's clear based on the language of the code. There's going to be a loading dock there already. The building inspector has issued his opinion, and as the interpreter and enforcer of the zoning code, it is binding, and if people don't like it, they can go to the Board of Adjustment and ask the Board of Adjustment to overrule him. But he's the guy in the code who gets to interpret and enforce the zoning code. So I wasn't going to start there, but since you all had asked questions about it, I thought I would. I'm just going to run through the questions and answers as I did them in my letter, just so, and perhaps it'll refresh folks' memory. I won't dwell on things to the extent they're put to bed. We did say at our May meeting that we were not going to have the off-site parking. Now, there's some history there, and as Ms. Gay indicated, this plan has been in front of the Planning Commission a number of times. Initially, it was a concept plan, though, right? That's a entirely separate procedure. And as a concept plan, I think it's allowed to change. So if people want to complain about changes since the concept plan or the lack of certain detail, I think that's a little unfair and misses the point of a concept plan. But regardless, we were told by the former building inspector that we could have off-site parking. And in fact, my client went out and bought that ground because that's what he was told. And then, and look, part of your process here, I mean, right, 4 eyes are better than 2, 2 hands are better than 1. When we came to you initially, it was pointed out to us based on past precedent in the town that presumably Mr. Molino was not aware of, that off-site parking for hotels isn't permitted. So we've adjusted our plan accordingly. I don't think we should be penalized or criticized for doing that. We were acting on information from the building inspector, and that's why we went to that time and expense. But problem solved. We're going to have a second level of underground parking, and I understand that at least a few of you think that's probably a better result anyway, because now we have all the parking at one location and we don't have surface parking taking up a lot. There was questions about the floor area ratio before and lot coverage issues. I think those have been put to bed by Mr. Janis's opinion and our letter. It is true that the zoning code says a hotel may only have a lot coverage of 50%. We're under 50% here. But for the upper floors, the code doesn't impose a strict 50% requirement. It just says the upper floors have to average 50%. So the lot coverage is for the ground level only, and we satisfy that particular requirement. And then with respect to the floor area ratios for the upper floors, we went to the Board of Adjustment, as you all know, and before the Board of Adjustment, we said to the board, here's our plans, here's what we want to do, 300% floor area ratio. And the Board of Adjustment said, yes, we will grant that variance. Some of you may disagree with that. I don't know. People in the audience may disagree with it, but that's what the board did. It was their decision to make. And they didn't say anything about the individual floors. But as a matter of mathematics, of course, in order to get to a 300% total floor area ratio, if your first floor is at 100%, which it is here between the commercial and the hotel, That means your floors 2, 3, and 4 have to add up to 200%, or an average of 66.6%. The board didn't specifically say that in their written decision, and some question that, but in their more recent decision on the Grotto Hotel, in the second to last paragraph, the board writes, having found that an increase in permitted FAR from 200% to 276% is appropriate, it follows that an increase in the maximum FAR for floors 2 through 4 is presumed appropriate. Otherwise, the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable. Accordingly, the 76% FAR increase may be apportioned among floors 2 through 4. And so that logic applies to the variance that was also granted here, and we talked about that in our letter. There were some questions about parking. I think we've addressed those. I will say I'm a little surprised to be hearing for the first time, having made our submission almost 2 months ago to this day, that there was a question about some of the size of some of the parking spaces. There is a provision in the Rehoboth Code, it's section 92-43, that does allow for certain parking spaces to be made sized for compact cars. We'll work that issue out with the building inspector, but that's what we were relying on. We didn't just willy-nilly say, oh, let's have some smaller spaces. There's actually language in the code that allows for that, and we'll work it out. There were some questions about the height requirements, whether the cupola at the top exceeded the height requirement. And as we said at that meeting, and the revised drawings now reflect, there was some mislabeling on some heights in one section of the plans, not the other section, but we satisfy the height requirements. There was questions about some of the overhangs for the upper level balconies and whether they met the sloping setback requirements. Yeah, I think they exceeded them by like 2 feet, as it turns out. So we're going to scale those back, and I believe the revised drawings reflect that. But again, that was an easy fix. There were questions about the way certain areas in the hotel were designated. Some were listed for bar and didn't indicate they were also going to be for food and sit-down dining. All that nomenclature has now been made consistent. So I think we've addressed that concern. There was a question about getting a letter of approval from the Denrec Shoreline folks. We will get that in due course.
Would you repeat that, please? I'm
We
sorry.
will get that letter in due course.
And will that include the second underground floor parking?
Yes, I mean, we will get whatever approvals we need from every other agency we're going to get. I mean, we're not trying to pull a fast one. We're trying to be as open and as honest and as transparent as we can with you. And so that's why we're having this dialogue, and I appreciate the fact that we are having this dialogue, and I want to thank you for letting that happen. Let's see, there was a question about when we're going to consolidate the various lots that make up the overall site that we're looking at. That will happen when the plan is approved, and then we'll record that. So that's part of the process we're going through now. There was a question about ADA compliance for some of the parking. We've corrected that. And so that's been taken care of. There was a question whether additional plus review was required or not. I've spoken again with the folks at the Office of State Planning, and their position continues to be, if you don't make any change to the site plan itself, just the site plan, you can do whatever you want to the building, just the site plan, then we have no further comments. And I've asked for that to be put in writing, and I hope to have that soon. I hope, quite frankly, to have it before today, but such is life. So those were the questions that I think you asked us about. And then as Mr. Janus submitted his letter, and again, his letter was consistent with my earlier letter, which made me feel good. And then, of course, I read you the language from the Board of Adjustment's recent decision. So those are all things that happened since the May meeting that we all had. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks here may have or continue to have or don't think I satisfactorily addressed, because I want you all to be comfortable. This is a good plan. It will be good for Rehoboth Beach. That is our fundamental belief. That's what's driving this. Mr. Papajohn, you've heard from him in the past. This is a beautiful, in my view, architectural building, and I don't say that to make Peter's head swell. It's really, really a nice building. And it's going to be, I think, a really beneficial thing for Rehoboth in the long run. So I want to make sure that we address your questions satisfactorily.
Thank you, sir. Members of the commission, Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got, as we joked a couple of months ago, Mr. Forson's an attorney and I'm an engineer and not an attorney.
The microphone down.
Sorry. My questions are mostly all technical, so I don't know if you want me to address them to you first or to Peter or?
I think, well, I appreciate the fact you're an engineer, and I think I told you my dad was an engineer his whole career for DuPont. But I'll play traffic cop, if you
Okay.
will, or air traffic controller, and I'll try to direct your questions to the right person.
Okay, and I apologize, I had to do these as a list because since my stroke, I lose
Not a
track of
problem.
things fairly easily.
Not a problem.
As was noted, as was discussed here previously with regard to what Matt said and other things, the current plans, it's still a sketch plan review essentially, because it does say on the plans, for illustrative purposes only, subject to change in design. So clearly, the design is still active with regard to bits and pieces.
Well, again, nomenclature and words can be funny things, and as a lawyer, of course, Luke and Glenn and I, we make our living on the meaning of words. This is a preliminary plan. It's not the final plan, right?
Right, I'm just confirming that.
Right, and so we will get preliminary plan approval, knock on wood, I hope, with your all's blessing. And then, once we do that, we have to go back then and fill in a lot of the really, really specific things that aren't on a preliminary plan, and they all have to be done to the city's satisfaction and the review of its departments. But yes, you're right, but I don't think it's fair to ask for a final plan. This is
No,
not a
I'm not
final
asking
plan.
that, I'm just confirming that is the
Yeah.
status of where we're at.
Yes, you are correct, sir.
And along that lines, there's several rooms that are identified as amenity, which ultimately, when we do the checklist, you have to define whatever they are, which hasn't occurred yet and isn't expected. The other is, and it's a question with regard to the physicality of it, which relates to the fire report and some other issues. Is the solar panel system use battery backup at all?
I don't know that we have an answer to that, but I'll ask Peter if he wants to comment.
So it's still to be determined.
So for the record, for those who couldn't hear Mr. Phillip, he said, we just haven't finalized and that yet.
It's to be determined at this time.
Okay, because it obviously, if it has a battery backup system, has a big impact in a multitude of ways. The other is really an administrative issue, which I noticed, and I first I have to confirm if my numbers are right. The original calculation that was done for the FAR at 3.0, the plan on drawing A0001 in the top left corner indicates 31,106 feet. And when I was looking at it, there appears to be a minor error in the calculation because one of the rooms identified as a ballroom is 12 feet tall. And when something's 12 feet tall, you have to double the floor space. And if you follow that, which could or should have been done, it results in a greater calculation of FAR, and your FAR actually ends up being 3.03. Now, there's a simple administrative solution that's engineering, but it's a solution. If your 12-foot ceiling can be 11 feet, 11 inches, and 7/8 of an inch, it's fully compliant. I happen to think that rule in the code is absurd, but nonetheless, it's there. So the original plan, which had that in there, the approval was for a FAR of 3.0, but in fact, it was a FAR of 3.03. So if that gets corrected on your current future plans, that problem goes away. And just for consistency, I think it's important that it be accurate, so to speak.
And Mr. Strange, just like I didn't want to have Mr. Fillet's head swell, I don't want your head to swell, but that is a great catch to the extent it's accurate, and so I appreciate that level of detail.
I have enough stress in my head as it is without swelling with my heart condition. So.
Understood.
The other is with regard to the cupola. And and again, this gets back to math, and I may or not be right, but in trying to use the diagrams, the ground floor calculation, the cupola can be 5% of that. So 5% of 38,232 is 1,912, and it appears to indicate that it's actually 2,304. So you still can have a cupola, but it appears that it's too large in terms of its physical dimensions. So if it gets reduced just a tad, it's fine.
I appreciate that. We will, again, double-check that.
Okay. The other is the exoskeleton of the proposed antenna. Is that entire thing made of metal?
It's anticipated to be, yes.
It is going to be metal, okay. That's fine, because if it wasn't metal, then it's no longer an antenna, but there is an issue, or at least that I identified, on the antenna, you have a weather station, and a weather station isn't an antenna. So if you want to keep the antenna, you can't have the weather station as a practical matter with regard to the code. So you can still have your antenna at the height that you want. I'll wait. Okay. At the May PC meeting on the 5th, you had indicated that the state fire marshal had reviewed updated plans that reflected the decision to eliminate the off-street parking and go to a two-level parking design. Is the plan set that we subsequently got on the 22nd, is that the plan that he reviewed and approved?
I believe that the plan set, that our most recent plan set is the May 17th plan set.
Right, and we got them on the 22nd. That's what I'm saying. The ones that you produced, the large scale, which went to the city, and then we physically got them on May 22nd. So it was the 17th plans. That's the one that he looked at.
No, he looked at the plans before that, the set before that did not have the second level of parking below grade. Everything else about the building is the same.
Oh, I thought when we were here, you said the plans he evaluated were the new ones that had the second level. Did I
Yeah, maybe you misunderstood that, but
that was my mistake? Okay.
Or we could have misspoke. But the answer is he has not looked at a set of plans with the second level of underground parking.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that, which then leads to the second part of my question. When he reviewed the original plans, I assume he made comments on regard to the physical structure with regard to capacities, and the capacities for people capacities unrelated to what the International Building Code are structural capacities. And we don't have, did he issue a letter, and we don't have that?
yes, there's a letter.
Okay.
Yeah, we can send a copy of it for you. Sure.
Okay. And that's important in terms of how what the numbers are. I mean, basically, we don't know that. Okay. So we need to have that eventually for the formal review. Okay, that floor capacity, we got that. Oh, and the other thing was,
I don't believe it's part of the formal review, but we'll submit it for you. It's not on the checklist.
but it's our responsibility under the state code of what we're supposed to evaluate in terms of fire, calamity, et cetera. So that's just one of the elements that we have to do. The other thing was, when that package came in that was turned over to us, it had a Bowler engineering package that was 22 pages long that referred to an application in Berlin, Maryland. And I asked the city and said, was there an updated Bowler package that we were supposed to have gotten? Or was that a total screw-up and we weren't supposed to see it at all? And I never got a response.
We have no idea what.
Yeah, I apologize. I have no idea what you're referring to. Was there just a reference, or was it a set
No,
of
it's
plans?
a Bowler, it was a package of information from Bowler Engineering. Pardon?
Yeah.
And I started to read it because I thought it was an update to the year-old information. And it was describing work that they're doing in Berlin, Maryland, and everything.
Not our submission. It was included inappropriately with ours.
Yeah, I mean,
We don't have any-
the runner might have dropped off 2 packages rather than 1. Did you get anything related to this project from Bowler?
None, just the drawings.
Just,
got the
just
drawings.
Mr. Follett's drawings.
I knew the drawings were valid, and the Bowler Engineering document I assumed was yours, and I started reading it and said, wait a minute,
All
this
right,
is.
well, obviously, you know, that was 2 months ago, and this is the first we're hearing of this, but we'll get
I
you.
contacted the city immediately. I assumed they would have done something.
So it appears that the runner dropped off two packages, one that had to do with this project and one that had to do with the second project. The second project you got to review as well. It has nothing to do with our project, okay? So I'm glad you learned something about Berlin, Maryland. We have nothing to do with that. Our project submission was complete. It included architectural and civil drawings
Good.
only.
So the Bowler document from basically a year and a couple months ago was still there is no update to that one for your project.
The submission that was made on May 17th is the entire final submission.
Well, Mr. Flat, we'll need a separate review fee since we looked at two plans.
Bowler can pay those.
That's right. Okay.
Plus, you know, it's in Maryland too, right? So it's not even Delaware.
Oh,
Well, I knew Rehoboth was growing.
Okay, next one. On drawing A0101S dated 5/5/23, it still reflects a drop-off zone on the hotel on Wilmington Avenue and takes up 5 spaces. And this was really a question both to the city attorney and us, actually. Do you still plan to have that drop-off zone, is the first question, since you no longer have the remote parking? And if it does consume all those spaces, well, first of all, I have to know if, in fact, you're still planning to do that. And if you are planning to do that, then it becomes an issue, I think, to the city attorney with regard to how does one take public property that you don't have the rights to? So it's just a general question.
I can comment on that briefly. So there are instances of the city licensing public property. But the process is you apply to the city commissioners who would then review the application. So it'd have to be an approval from the city commissioners to issue a license for the use of that property.
Okay, so thank you for, I figured that was the case, but in terms of our review of the process, that's another piece of the action. One, the question is, do you still plan to do that since you no longer have the off-site parking garage, which is under our auspices and what we're supposed to do? But then if you elect to do that, it involves things that aren't under what we do. So,
Well, again, I mean, just like we're going to get all the approvals that we need from DENRAC, we're going to get all the other approvals we need from the city, or we're not going to be able to do this project as depicted. So, you know, it's always kind of a chicken and the egg problem, and everybody always wants to see the project at the end before they get to review. But, you know, we're going down many parallel paths, and this is one of those paths. But there's no point in even going to the city commissioners
right,
about this
until you get
issue
to the
until
rest
we
of it.
get preliminary
Right,
plan
okay.
approval.
So I just point that out for reference.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
The other one, and my evaluation has nothing to do with whether the number of docks are 1 or 2. That's a separate issue that's obviously being debated. My assessment, looking at the code about a loading berth and an unloading berth, there are 2 characteristics of what constitutes in the building code a loading and unloading berth. And there are 2 pieces to it, not just one, and everyone has focused just on one. Accommodation of off-street for loading and unloading of motor transport equipment, and designed to provide adequate space for efficient maneuvering into and out of the loading position at properly constructed docks, either within a building or in a yard on the same lot. The current design has that element of it, all the maneuvering and locating being done on public property, the public street and the city sidewalk. And when I read the code as an engineer, and structurally, grammarly, from a grammar perspective, it's a logical and, A-N-D, and not a logical or. You don't do one or the other. You have to do both. And the capacity exists to do that, but it obviously affects design. So I just bring that up as an issue.
Can you tell me what section of the code you're reading?
Yes, that's... Yeah, it's under 270-36, and the code definition of what a loading berth and a loading dock is.
Okay.
And it's a combination of those 2 elements. Okay, okay. The other is the basis for determination of the size of the waste dumpster area identified on drawing A0101S and Bowler Engineering Drawing C-101, it indicates that trash collection is proposed inside the proposed improvements, which means all the trash is going to be kept internally and go to, quote, the loading dock. Based on knowledge and experience in the waste area, it just seems to be rather small. And so there are engineering standards that are published by various societies as to what the generation rate is for a facility like this, an integrated facility, both the retail and in fact within the hotel itself, the number of rooms, et cetera, the rate of putrescible generation and regular, what's considered municipal solid waste. So I raised that as an issue, and it would be nice to see what the calculations are as to how you got to that size. The other thing is, as a practical matter, it refers to it as an area for a dumpster area. And most of the general size of dumpsters exceed the size of the hallway and the doorway that you have. So it can't get out, basically. So it's something to be considered when you look at the design. Okay. Oh, on drawing A0302, dated 5/17/23. And again, I'm working off the architectural size drawings, and I know they're all tentative, but it appears to show that the loading dock height, as well as the access to the underground garage, is 10 feet. And most commercial trucks are 11 to 12 and a half feet high. So that would be problematic. Okay. The other is, it's just a question because I couldn't tell from the drawings, does the slope of the underground access to the underground garage meet the IBC's code for underground garages? It may very well, I just don't know. I couldn't tell from the drawings. And then along that line, assuming, because it is angled, there's a possible safety problem, but I don't know the details of what you're planning to do. But assuming a 5 mile per hour speed limit, which is usually the case for underground garages of this type, as you come up to the top to exit the garage, you have essentially you travel 7 feet in 1 second. And the garage has no clear space to the right of it, so you can't see onto the sidewalk while you're coming up to try to figure out what you're doing. And someone coming down the street can't see the car exiting. If that right-hand side were open in some fashion, that problem's eliminated. But I just raised that as an issue because it's an inherent safety issue. I had one question on ADA parking, and I may be incorrect on this. All the spots seem absolutely well done, except number 86, which appears not to meet the federal and state requirement of being the shortest distance possible. The rest of them are fine, and that may be an error on my part, as a matter of fact. But when I looked at the measurements, that was an odd person out. Okay. 2 months ago at the April meeting, there was a discussion between the adjacent property owner of Go Fish Restaurant and Mr. Falat. And Mr. Falat correctly said, and it's absolutely the right of this application, you can build to the property line, period. That's, and it may have impacts, but you're allowed to build to the property line. And the architectural drawings show that. As an engineer, though, in looking at that, when you attempt to build the foundation, you have to put retaining walls in. And I'm not telling you how you're supposed to do it, but generally speaking, in this type of situation with this type soil in that location and the water levels involved, you have to drive some form of pilings that are parallel to the property line to prevent the collapse of the foundations. In order to do that, you're going to violate the airspace of those property owners, because there's no pile driver that I'm familiar with that can be fully contained within the property line. And the property line is an invisible line, both vertically and horizontal. So you need some form ultimately, and it's not what we do, of some right of trespass in order to do that. And my last one.
No, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, ask away. This is what we're here for.
The Hillis-Carnes Belhaven Geotechnical Survey dated April 1st, 2022, which we received at the April meeting. On page 10, item number 6.9, below grade walls, excuse me, I need to take a drink of water. Specifies the design conditions for the soil characteristics and also meet a minimum safety factor of 1.5. I'm not going to debate whether 1.5 is sufficient or not. I'm just going to accept it as is because that was their analysis. Should be applied to all passive pressure calculations, page 11, second paragraph. Using their base calculation of a 1.5 safety factor in their statement on page 11, paragraph 3, just before section 6.10, the requirement that the underground garage be built for undrained conditions per figure 7 in their appendix of the analysis. I can give you this if you want what I'm
I was going to say, it might be helpful if you could put this in writing for us, because I can scribble, but not that fast.
Yeah. Okay. All drawings presented by Bowler Engineering and the Falat documents have the Belhaven design going fully to the property lines in all directions. Per the figure and the design recommendation by Hillis-Carnes Engineering, that means you're going to be building the basis to get at the foundation 12 to 18 inches under everybody else's property and including the city's property, which you can't do because you don't own that property. So you don't have to write it.
All right, well, we will look at this just like we look at all the other, I mean, I appreciate all your questions.
That's it.
All right, well, we will get back to you. We will consult with our experts and the folks from Hills-Carn and get you answers. Thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Strange.
apologize for-
Any other member of the commission?
I have a couple questions. And in looking at your letter, May letter, and specifically with regard to the discussion of paragraph 8, does the building comply with lot coverage? Did you go back and look at the variance, the testimony and submissions of your team when you got the Board of Adjustment variance for 2.0 to 3.0 FAR?
I've read that opinion many times, yes.
But you didn't look at the testimony or didn't read the transcript or?
I read the entire transcript, but I have to admit that I read that about a year ago.
Okay. Because your letter caused me to go back and take a look at the submissions, the written submissions, the testimony, the representations by counsel and the architect. And it's very clear that as the order was written, that the sole request for us from 2 to 3. That's part of the explicit request. It's also clear in submissions that there's a recognition that there's a distinction between this floor area ratio and the different gross floor areas of hotels versus residential. And in fact, at some point between submissions, the size of floors change after representations being made that it complies with that 50-75 broken out. So I would encourage you to go back and look at what was submitted in support of that application.
Well,
With regard to what actual variance did you get, which again is clear on the face of the order, but it's also clear on what you asked for. And also you gave testimony about the different floors and their compliance with the 50 and 75. And then subsequent to that, somehow the floor changed without addressing it directly. So I think that helps inform the, you know, it sort of supports, you know, it's clear on its face what you asked for and what you got.
So I would respectfully disagree, and here's why. You can't have floors 2, 3, and 4 average 50% and have a 300% FAR. Mathematically, it doesn't work. And we submitted drawings that showed 300% FAR. And we said in our application, and, you know, was it crystal, did we say at the hearing, oh, by the way, if you give us 300% FAR, that means that the other 3 floors have to average 66% rather than 50%? No, we didn't actually explicitly say that. But as the board just said, to clear up, I think, any confusion about this issue, it says in the 1 Rehoboth Avenue, having found that an increase in permitted FAR from 200% to 276% is appropriate, and here, all you need to do is change the word 276 to 300%. So the board, having found that an increase in FAR to 300% was appropriate, and now I'm going back to their decision, it follows that an increase in the maximum FAR for floors 2 through 4 is presumed appropriate. Otherwise, the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable.
And that's for 1 Rehoboth.
Well, that language comes from the 1 Rehoboth decision. My point is that when the board voted to grant an increase to FAR of 300%, and they had drawings in front of them that showed floors 2 through 4 all above 50% because you couldn't get to 300% FAR without having those floors greater than 50%. It was presumed, and it is presumed, that you get an increase in those floors as well. Otherwise, the entire proceeding in front of the Board of Adjustment was a farce and a waste of everybody's time, and that is not what the law presumes.
Do you have support for your implied variance position?
There's nothing implied about it, but yes, I have support. I have the board's written decision in 1 Rehoboth.
Do you have any other support other than your interpretation?
If you went through the entire record, you would find, I think, references to the plan submitted with the application and the fact that the applicant was seeking a variance to 300% in accordance with those plans. So, I mean, we didn't just make up the number 300 and say this is what we want and then think about it. There were actual plans that were shown to the board as part of the variance application.
And there were different square footages.
Well, there may...
That's why I asked you at the outset if you looked at the record. And I'm encouraging you to look at the record.
I will go back and look at it, but I don't think this should be a hard discussion or an argument, because I hope you would agree with me that if I ask the board for an increase in total FAR from 200 to 300%, at the same time, implicit in that request, I have to be asking for an increase in the FAR for the individual floors. Otherwise, my first request is a total waste of time and meaningless, and the law does not presume that the Board of Adjustment or anybody will issue a vacuous or meaningless decision. The only way that decision makes sense is if you presume, and they explicitly said this in 1 Rehoboth Avenue, but the only way that decision makes sense is that we get an increase in the average for floors 2 through 4. Otherwise, the variance means nothing.
Mr. Forston, you asked if we agreed to a premise that you put forward. We can't agree to anything at this point. We don't even have a full set of plans in front of us. So I would just state for the record that the Planning Commission's not in a position to agree to your premise. We hear you, we thank you, and we'll consider it. It just matters of procedure.
Let me just elaborate on that. Richard, as you noted, this is a preliminary review meeting, and when this matter gets to a final action following a public hearing, to be sure, the Planning Commission will be asked to make formal findings of fact and conclusions of law, and it will do so at that time. Let me just say, as I indicated to you privately, Richard, that With all due respect to Mr. Mandalis and with all due respect to you, you should not assume that the Planning Commission today agrees or disagrees with you one way or the other with any of your legal conclusions. The legal conclusions of the Planning Commission will be articulated at the time it takes final action.
Well, don't misinterpret what I just said.
I'm not
We're
misinterpreting.
having a discussion.
I'm not
and-
misinterpreting.
And
Please, one second. I want to make sure that the record is clear regarding what legal conclusions this Planning Commission will make at the right time.
Right. But when I said I hope you would agree with me, I mean, that's a matter of rhetoric. I mean, I wasn't trying to pin the commissioner into taking a particular position, and obviously she is only one of 9. And I mean, I sit on a school board and I'm only one of 5. So, I mean, people can ask me for my opinion about different things, and it doesn't matter. It takes at least 3 votes of the school board. It'll take at least 5 votes of the Planning Commission. So I don't disagree with anything you just said, Mr. Mehta.
Thank you, sir.
I have a quick question. In terms of the construction and how long it will take, how long is it anticipated construction would take?
I'm being whispered 2 years.
Okay. And then has there been any thought given, and if so, what steps might be taken to minimize impact to businesses that are adjacent? Because you know here it's a seasonal, largely a seasonal business. Has any thought been given to that, and what kind of workarounds, if any, are being thought about?
Well, obviously, we want to be good neighbors, and as I think you all know, because you know more about Rehoboth than I do probably, you can't do demo during the season. So you would probably start your demolition work as soon as the season ended or shortly thereafter, and make as much progress as you can during the off-season. I mean, we're all familiar where there's construction ongoing in cities that you have boards up to shield the public and provide safety for the public as it passes by. So I think we do all of that, and I imagine, although Mr. Janis can tell me I'm wrong, but I imagine that the city code, the building code sections now I'm talking about, have requirements, and just as we're going to comply with DENREC and everything else, we're going to comply with the code. But, Mr. Papajohn has been in this city, I think, longer than anybody else in this room has been, and he loves this city. And that's one of the reasons why he's pursuing a project that some might tell him he doesn't have to pursue. It's too much. But he's going to do everything he can to make this a good project, and he wants to protect his city, and that's why we're doing it.
Is there any specific answer to Commissioner Stewart's question as to what you plan to do to mitigate the impact on other businesses?
Sure.
No.
Yes, sir.
This is Mr. Jeff Zell, one of our
Please introduce yourself.
I will. I'm Jeff Zell with Jam Zell Partners, and we build projects pretty much all over the country and some even outside of the United States. And the Papajohns have brought my company in to oversee the overall development of this project. And we've done probably close to $10 billion of this type of development. And these developments are very important to your community, absolutely. And they have to be done in a way that we believe best represents the quality of the experience for people. And we need to start working on, with you, on how we're going to deal with bringing this project online in a very systematic way. And we've had a lot of discussions internally because there are really 2 components to this. The retail, which is extremely important for the boardwalk. You don't want it down for 3, 4, 5 years. I think everybody's concerned. And part of us getting this plan done so we can get moving is to get into the details to the Planning Commission. Just an overall concept would be to come up with a marketing plan, to come up with how we're going to attack the site. The retail is different than the hotel, and the systems that operate the retail are different than the systems that operate the hotel. And one of the things that we've been talking about, once we get further downfield, would be to potentially bring this thing online in 2 pieces. and that is to go after the retail very quickly so that your front door looks great very quickly. So I'm not really sure I need to hold 24 months. I'm just, if you really get into my head one afternoon, I'd love to explain it to you. I can tell you how to do this, but we'd like, and not only one, we want to do it. Two, it'll look great. And three, it gives this guy some revenue because you collect money from the retailers, and it's an expensive and important piece of this endeavor, okay? So we've been looking at ways to get that first level up done because we can work above it, and it doesn't really impact anybody. And I think that's really where we're heading. We have a terrific team here. The Papa John's have hired a lot of people here with a lot of experience to get this done. It's complicated because you do have seasonality, and it's a serious seasonality issue. And I know John and I have had these discussions when we can start, so we get all hyperventilated here because it's not only because we need answers, and there's a lot of things we're gonna work out. Look, nobody's gonna give us $75 to $100 million in loans without making sure this building is gonna be what it really is gonna be. It's gonna be safe, it's gonna be quality, it's gonna be a great building, and it's generational. We're not, typically, I do a lot of buildings where I build them and 5 years later I'm gone. In this instance, I'm giving it to a family that they're gonna keep it for the next 50 years. So everybody's gotta understand that. And so they're also spending money on things that, candidly, I think is going too far, but I think it's really good for your community. So I think that's a great question. We've been on it, thinking about it. He's worried about it. We're all worried about it. Worried in the sense that we don't want to keep getting delayed, and we really need to start this project at the right period of time where we span a lot of the construction in the off-season. You know, the last thing I need to do is get an approval in May, and I started here in June. I said, you don't even want any parts of that, and I understand that. We'd like to be at a point where May of the following year, you know, it looks really good. We may not be open, but it'll look good, and then we'll open it as quickly as we can after that. But we need probably 12, 14 months to get that done.
And I really appreciate your help on that. I guess, like, and I'm not an engineer,
Right.
but you have, your wall will abut or adjoin or be attached to, and again, I don't understand, and maybe I'm misreading it, but the property line, adjoining business.
Yeah.
I don't, like, how does that work? Like, if you're inside the other business and you're a patron, I mean, like, how does that unfold?
Peter and I mean, I've known Peter for a long time. We do this in major cities. I mean, I abut buildings all the time because that's unfortunately, there's not extra land. If we're out in the cornfields, you can have a good time, lay stuff on it. But we're always on property line. And we're using heavy-duty construction. This isn't, the construction that we're looking at doing that Peter submitted to the building commission is serious stuff. It's not stick frame with wood. We're going concrete and steel. Great facade. The exterior is a very expensive exterior. But we can drop. I know he's an engineer. We've been able, and Bowler's sitting here over here, and we have geotechnical people as well. We can put that thing on the line, and it won't disturb the people next door. It will not. And we're not really, candidly, 2 stories down is really no big deal. I've been in places where I've gotten 6 stories down, and that is a serious event. In Alexandria right now, I'm part of the big dig down there. If it was just in the Washington Post, we're digging out almost 120 feet under the city, and we're party to that deal. And that's a whole crazy other thing and very expensive. But going 2 levels down with concrete, the way we have it and the way Bowler and our geotechnical people, we do it all the time. I'm in an office building in Washington, D.C. that's on a party line wall that has 2 levels and 1 level's below sea level because we're right on the canal. And it's fine. It's operated great. But it's got to be done right. And I do understand everybody here. I am just telling you the group of people that's over here has done it before. And the GC that have preliminary with is a very large one. And this is serious. So we're not going to mess around here. And I know, you know, it's hard when people understand the Papa John's because they're local and they've been here a long time. But they've gone out and hired some very talented people. And we're looking forward to getting going. But we're going to put up really nice things on the boardwalk. We're going to call it a marketing company. It'll look beautiful. And it'll be shown to you. Obviously, you're part of the process. We would never do anything without it. And I work in Alexandria, DC, New York City, Boston, did Faneuil Hall. So we've done a lot of stuff. And I'm telling you, I think everybody's going to be very happy. That's all I can tell you. But we're not trying to cut corners. And all the questions that everybody's asking, we're going to resolve everyone. There's nothing here that's a game stopper. And it's all technical, and it's all how you do it. And if you have the right people. And the other thing is, it takes a little money, because sometimes it's a little more expensive. So that's it. But I just want to make sure everybody understands, we've all been waiting. It's like a race car over here. We're all trying to figure out what we're building, and in the sense of, let's get started so that we can get absolute solutions. Right now, these are all preliminary, in a sense, right? So we're ready to go. And I think we've been here a long time. So, but I think timing is really important when we get a green light here, because we're trying not to take you out 2 seasons.
That'd be terrific.
Yeah.
Because I think surrounding business owners, you want to be good neighbors, but
Perfect.
you also don't want to knock somebody's wall down.
We're hoping that it draws more. If we get 1 season and it turns out beautiful and everybody thinks it's awesome,
Everybody will be happy.
oh, they're going to be real happy. Right. So, I mean, that's the goal. We're not here to, okay?
Okay.
So, thank you.
Let's see. Some of you have
State your name
heard
for the record,
this a
please,
little
sir.
bit. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Some of
your
you have
name,
heard me
please.
make this statement in a
Mr. Papa John, you gotta introduce
Papa
yourself.
John, it's the name. I came down here at 5 years old, 1938, and went to Rehoboth High School all the way through. Our family was here for years. So I'm not going to go through all the hard work we had to go through, but I can't help but get a little emotionally involved. So you'll have to forgive me. The point I want to make in summing everything up is I showed these plans to people that I knew in DC because I was there for 27 years, lived in the Mount Vernon area, practiced downtown before a lot of federal agencies, representing municipalities, different businesses, individuals. City of Dallas was a client of ours. We got into it with the Redskins and the Cowboys. So anyway, what I'm trying to point out is that our objective as a family is we're not trying to put up some condominium or a motel situation that we're trying to sell out in 4 or 5 years and leave. And there may be headaches left with it, yes or no. But we intend to stay here, hopefully, with the family. And I won't be around that much longer, but my boys and the 2 grandchildren will be here for 50 or 75 years, I hope. So what I'm trying to emphasize is I showed this to some people I knew in Washington where I got involved in the building game just behind the Supreme Court doing townhouses. And they all asked me, they said, "You're spending a lot of money here on this place." I said, well, it's not just an investment per se to make money, which it is fundamentally, but my objective is to try and create a place that is nice enough that you attract middle income to upper middle income people to come here, that not only will we be able to rent motel rooms for a little more than the ordinary motel room that you get outside of town, but that you'll be able to have the kind of customers that are middle income and upper middle income that frequent stores like Carlton's Men's Shop, the Spice and Tea Shop in our place, and all that, so that we improve the economic atmosphere up and down Rehoboth Avenue and bring in the kind of people that are going to spend a little money so that these retailers can make it and nice restaurants can stay in town rather than moving outside of town. Now, this may be an objective that some people don't want, but what's going to happen is we're dealing with a slow tidal wave of people coming here, because we all know the headaches with the traffic and the parking. We go crazy
When are you going to go shopping at Giant? What, 9 o'clock at night or something? You hate the traffic. But hopefully, if you build things in town, you're going to have parking for them, and you're going to have the income from a nice place that these farm boys from over and played football against them, Bridgeville, Greenwood, Ellendale, west of Georgetown, Laurel, they're rezoning motels just outside of town here. So what's happening? From an economic standpoint, they're going to be coming here to stay in a motel room because they want to go to the beach and so forth. So who winds up with the traffic problems? We do, all of us. Business owners are not, because they don't have any place to stay. Park. Now, we are providing the parking spaces, so please try and think about this, that at a minimum, the investment in trying to put up a few motels or whatever on Rehoboth Avenue or Wilmington Avenue or Baltimore Avenue, wherever, you're going to provide parking there, and you're going to get the revenue from the taxes that the city's going to take in, rather than having these Sussex County commissioners rezoning places nearby here, renting all kinds of rooms there, fine, but you wind up, we all do, with the traffic headaches and no parking for them. They're parking at their motel out here. So what I'm trying to emphasize is the emphasis by our family is not just to make an investment to make a lot of money quickly. It's going to take between 12 to 16 years to pay this thing off if it goes well. A lower cost place, which I call the difference between having a nice place that we have designed versus, for lack of a better term, a 4-story mausoleum, is a difference in many, many thousands of dollars difference in investment. So the minimum of investment and the maximization of return is not our goal. Our goal is, yes, to make an investment that pays for the long term, but we want a building there that people can be proud of. So when they take pictures of the gazebo and the Belhaven and whatever there, it's a nice looking thing. It's not a pilot's junk is what I would call it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have just a couple of quick, getting back to the drawings, because my goal here is to get to help get to the final drawings so that we don't reduce the number of stages we go through. But I do have a question on the level overhangs that were not code compliant. You did say in your letter that we will reduce the overhangs and link to be code compliant. So you intend to do that for the final drawings?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then my other question is a little bit more involved, and that is,
By the way, we have to. I mean,
yes,
and as I've said many times, we will be a code compliant plan when this is done.
That's why I asked. Yeah, just trying to get to that stage.
Yes.
My other question is a little bit more involved in that, in the sense that I noticed on the May 17th plans that the 2 bar areas, both in the lobby, which has already been described as part of the restaurant because it's in the lobby, so it's already described that way. But both that bar area as well as the one on the upper floor have simply been relabeled cafe. So I want to point out a couple of things so that the drawings can be accurate. First of all, the definition in our code of cafe is an establishment, not a restaurant, where food and liquor is served and consumed. And you do say in your letter that it was always the intent to serve food there. However, if you look at 270 19E, I think, you'll see that a cafe is a prohibited use throughout the city. And the reason for that is that restaurants have a number of other criteria that they have to meet. And I am a little concerned, or I have questions about whether the area that went from being labeled bar to being labeled cafe is going to meet all of those. For instance, the restaurant has to serve complete meals, not just food and drink. It has to have tables and seating for 35 people, and the kitchen has to be connected. And with the 4th floor space, specifically with the outdoor dining patio, there can be no bar on the patio. And so I guess I'm wondering, given all of that, are you going to redo the plans, to put the bar area in the restaurant on the 1st floor and to comply with all of the components of the restaurant code?
I'm sorry, my note-taking is a little slow. I mean, the answer is we will make all the revisions necessary to make this a code-compliant plan. So if what you're saying is correct, and I have no reason to doubt you,
Right there.
then we will make the appropriate revisions so that we are code compliant. And we'll work with Mr. Janis
Okay.
to make sure that that is the case.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Ellison.
I want to return to the hold on just a second here. The plus review. You made a statement, I believe, in your April 25th letter that no plus review is required.
No further plus review.
Further. And you did address it a little earlier by saying that you are in communication with those folks. But the letter that we received in our May agenda actually goes back, I presume that this is the original letter from the Plus people, and this went to Bowler, but that's October 19th and 21. I think the original Plus review was prior to that. I think it was in September.
Right, yeah, so the plus review is always the month before the date of the letter.
Right. And this says, please note that changes to the plan could result in additional comments from the state, et cetera. And in the report, it talks about a particular concern about construction of underground parking. This was in the DENREC portion of it. And my main question, I suppose, is are the Plus people aware of the fact that you have now put forward, a second underground floor of parking, and where are you in terms of all sorts of other things that were addressed in that original letter back in October 21? There were lots of indications of things that needed to be pursued, not only with DENREC, but with other agencies and so on. Can you give us a little more of an update rather than just a comment that no further review is required?
So, I don't mean to sound cynical here, but I read a lot of Plus letters. I can tell you sometimes exactly what a letter will say before it's issued because the language is virtually identical in many, many letters. And so the language about, further changes may result in additional comments, that is, I will say, boilerplate. I mean, it's in every Plus letter you ever see. And so we have had that conversation, and we have indicated that an additional level of underground parking is now going to be done. And we were told, did you change the site plan? By that I mean the bird's eye view of the site plan. Did you make any changes to that plan? And the answer was no, we're not making any changes to the site plan. And from the Office of State Planning's perspective, if we weren't making any changes to that, we didn't need any further Plus review. But I did specifically mention the additional underground parking. Now, the Plus letter typically says, consult with the fire marshal, consult with DENREC, consult with DELDOT. I don't know if it would have said DELDOT here since we're actually in a city, but it normally says consult with DELDOT. And we have been and continue to consult with appropriate agencies as is appropriate. And so, the state fire marshal has to sign off on the final construction drawings. But we don't have final construction drawings, right? Because we're not there yet. But he will provide those that no objection letter, or else we won't be able to continue with this project. So, and there was a question earlier from the chair about the letter from about letter of approval from the DENREC Shoreline and Waterway Management Section. We will get that letter. Again, it's always a chicken and the egg problem, but we got the Plus letter, and I don't think anything in it was surprising. And you have to, as a matter of course, talk to all these agencies anyway to get the additional approvals you need. So I don't know what else I can say to you other than I've been trying to get a letter just confirming that. And hopefully, within the next few weeks, we will actually have that letter. But that's where we are.
Thank you.
If I could just say, I don't recall, whether you were counsel at the time, but at the time of the PLUS review, I actually was a member of this commission, and I attended the PLUS review virtually. And the notes I have, which I don't have right in front of me, indicated that there were very serious concerns by DNREC, also by the Fire Marshal's office, especially with regard to the water pressure and other issues. And I have read the letter that they sent after that meeting, and it may be that the language is boilerplate, but I can tell you that the exchange at the meeting was not boilerplate. There were quite serious expressions. And so I am very interested in seeing in black and white what the current opinion of DNREC is and the fire marshal once you do have plans that are final enough for us to look at. Because we are required under the code to consider those state and city official opinions. And so we can't consider, I understand that they can't render an opinion until you submit something to them that doesn't change, in terms of parking or whatever. But we can't render an opinion about going forward until we see what those state officials have said. And, I've had no contact with the PLUS review people, but you've been saying, actually, I've been making notes, you've been saying for several months, and I take it that you would agree that you will furnish a letter, and we still haven't seen those letters.
I
And
think
so
that
that's a problem.
My first appearance before this body, although you can tell me I'm wrong, I thought it was in May. I was brought on, I was not at the PLUS meeting, I was not involved at that time. I mean, I got involved when the Board of Adjustment decision was appealed and defended that, and then came back to you all in May and made that
You may
initial
be
presentation.
correcting me, and it may not have been you
Right.
personally.
Right.
But there were representations made before May.
Yeah,
those
I don't know anything about those. I will tell you, I've spoken with the head of the Office of State Planning. I've described the facts to him that this is the project. We're now adding a second level of underground parking. Remember, when it was first presented, it already had one level. And his response to me was, there's no need to do a second PLUS review. So I will get that in writing. But, and I, as I say, I hoped to have it today, because then we wouldn't necessarily be having to have this colloquy, and I apologize I wasn't able to get it. But I can't tell you anything more than that at this time.
Ms. Davis.
Excuse me, like to follow up with just two quick questions. With respect to the second level of underground parking, you, applicant had submitted from a consultant the applicant had engaged, an engineering firm that I believe Mr. Strange referenced in one of his questions, that did a voluminous report with respect to construction issues with the first level of parking. Have you obtained, or are you going to obtain, a comparable report for the new second level of parking? And in that regard, I'd like to ask Wallace Montgomery. They had, as I understood it, were obtaining a consultant's report with respect to originally the first level of parking. Now we have the second level, and I'm wondering what the status of your subcontractors or subconsultants report on underground parking issues.
We do have a subconsultant that has the expertise to review that type of report, and they have reviewed the report that was mentioned previously. The one issue with that is that the plans that that we've seen, so the plans that they have looked at were the March plans that were previously submitted. They do not have the level of detail needed to appropriately review to determine the structural stability when looking at these items. There's just not enough detail to determine that information. So they would need more detailed plans and information to make any real determinations. They've provided us with more of a general statement, but anything that's more detailed or specific is sort of remains to be evaluated. I think something of that nature is likely not to be developed until perhaps a floodplain permit is submitted or something of that nature, or the building permit is submitted for, when those plans or that level of detail is developed and submitted. But it's that level of detail that I think that they would need to see to evaluate.
Well, I guess why I'm puzzled is that the applicant's consultant, I don't know what the applicant's consultant has seen, excuse me, that your sub-consultant hasn't seen, but the applicant's consultant delivered a report of over 100 pages with respect to the first floor of parking based on something that was provided to that consultant by the applicant. And I'm wondering what the applicant's consultant has seen by way of detail that your consultant hasn't.
Well, I mean, as I understand it, we have seen nothing that takes into consideration the issues related to the second level of parking. I mean, I believe that the document you're referring to from the applicant was dated 2022.
That was just the first level.
Yeah, that was just the first level. And so we're still waiting for any assessment as to the safety and so forth.
And my point was that Wallace Montgomery was going to get us a report on the first level, which we have never gotten, although we have something from the applicant. And my question to Mr. Forston also was, are we going to get something on the second level from your consultant?
And the answer is, off the top of my head, standing up here at 3:45 on a Friday in Rehoboth, I don't know. I mean, that's the best I can tell you at this particular moment. If I huddle up with these guys, I mean, look, it's all chicken and the egg issues here in any land use process. And you heard the representative from Montgomery Wallace talk about, we have to get levels of detail to evaluate certain things. We're not doing construction drawings until we get preliminary plan approval and move on in the process. And so to a certain extent, you're not going to see final construction drawings and have someone certify to you that these final construction drawings comply with all the applicable code provisions, have been reviewed thoroughly by the city, and the city is satisfied. A lot of that happens after the preliminary plan is approved.
And I think we understand that.
Okay, but you're asking, my point is, you're asking for stuff.
A report of in excess of 100 pages on the first level of parking based on what the drawings that you apparently have. We've got nothing from Wallace Montgomery on the first level of parking, and I'm wondering whether we're going to get anything from the applicant with respect to the second level of parking from either Wallace Montgomery or from you, your client.
All right, and I gave you my best answer right now is I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could get some sort of supplement to their initial report. But, that report wasn't generated necessarily for the preliminary site plan review. I mean, that report was something we did because we wanted to know that we could do this project. And so, we're going to make sure, and you heard Mr. Zell talk about it, we're not just going to put something up willy-nilly. I mean, this is going to be done right. It's going to be done consistent with all applicable codes, and it's going to be safe.
I have one final question, and I'm sorry to ask it, but because we've spent a lot of time talking about the lot coverage ratios for the second, third, and fourth floors relative to Section 270-21B5 of the code. And we've talked, and you have quoted to us the language in the 1 Rehoboth Avenue variance opinion about allocating the extra FAR to second, third, and fourth floors. But that section, 21B5, also has a second requirement or a second ratio, which is that one residential floor may not exceed 75% of the gross lot area. In the case of your plans, the gross lot area is shown as 38,000 square feet, and you can do the math as well as probably better than I can, but 75% is approximately 29,000 square feet, and the level 2 floor of the hotel is over 31,000 square feet. That exceeds the 75% level ratio, and I'm wondering what your position is with respect to that.
If you, my recollection is that when you calculate that 75%, it's the residential uses only, and you don't count the ballroom, and you don't count the other amenities. In other words, and if you strip those things out, then we're okay.
No, I think it's the opposite. You strip those things out, and you're in even worse shape.
No, if you strip those things out, the square footage
Hey,
goes down.
Would you check that math, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Public, you can do the public.
Yeah.
I've got a few questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Just in the spirit that the Planning Commission is demonstrating here, I just want to identify a couple other issues which, the sooner I think that, the applicant addresses these legal issues, the better. So that is the intent of my questions here. So the first one, I think I know the answer to this question, but I don't want to assume, Richard. So as you sit here today, does the applicant intend to seek and obtain any additional variances from the Board of Adjustment prior to seeking final action by the Planning Commission? You don't have to, I'm not going to put you on the spot if you don't want to answer that, but the sooner you can provide a clear answer to that, that would be helpful. With regard to, and maybe related to that, again, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm not going to ask you to answer a legal question today, but the sooner you provide, preferably in writing, would be helpful. With regard to lot coverage, even on the first floor, I would encourage you to look at the definition of lot coverage in the code, which talks about, it's the way I read it, it talks about that portion of the lot that's occupied by a structure rather than that portion of the structure that is for particular use. I haven't made a decision on this one way or the other. It's like a pretrial conference. I'm trying to mention that to you the other day. The sooner that we identify legal and factual issues now and get them articulated to determine whether they're disputed or not disputed, the better. Similarly, with regard to your argument in reliance on what I think, as I understand it, don't want to put words in your mouth, on a Board of Adjustment decision from another matter, I would encourage you again, and please address the distinction between floor area ratio and gross floor area. One second, please. No further questions.
Anyone else? Mr. Janis, straighten me out, please. Did you look at a set of plans with a second floor of underground parking or not?
The set of plans, the most recent that I have in paper format, was May 17th, and it does not show a second floor. Excuse me.
Okay.
Yes, they do. Excuse me, yes, they do. It's just not on the sections, but yes, there is a floor plan showing the second parking garage level.
So you have those plans?
I do, yes, sir.
And that will be reviewed and incorporated into your supplemental report that both
It would.
you and Wallace Montgomery are going to submit, okay? Anyone else? All right.
Oh, yeah, it does, okay.
How about a 5-minute break?
No, it's not, really?
Yeah. 5-minute break.
Okay.
Anyone here to speak to this particular application? Yes, sir.
My name is Dr. Michael Treos. We're the adjacent property owners to the Belhaven project. There was a submission that I gave to you that was more for informational purposes, and I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. But what I did want to touch base with was to dovetail comments made by Commissioners Ellison, Hunter, and Davis with regard to, in particular, Commissioner Hunter, you had asked about the floodplain consultant for Wallace Montgomery and the fact that they don't have enough information to be able to come to a decision on the matter. Well, that, in part, may be because there's still information that they still need. What I'd like to do is ask Matt, could you kindly give these out to everyone, please? And I will also pass around some for the applicants here, too.
Thank you.
Normally, what is required by an applicant who's doing a structure for the Department of Homeland Security normally requires that a certificate, a flood-proofing certificate of non-residential structures be submitted to both the city officials, the insurance companies, and to the building owner with regard to certifying that the subterranean structure will be able to withstand hydrostatic forces and saturation earth forces. In this, in what I've given you here are the actual equations, the mathematical equations that are supposed to be done by the applicant's architect, in this case, Flat Architect, or Bowler Engineering, with regard to providing to the city and to the applicant the appropriate calculations to determine exactly what the force loads are going to be on the structure. That in turn can then extrapolate what are going to be the force loads against the adjacent property owners and the city municipality sidewalks and roadways. This information has not yet been submitted by the applicant, and it would probably be of help to the city, to Matt Janis of Building and Licensing, to be able to have the appropriate calculations, and then Wallace Montgomery's floodplain consultant can then take that information forward to determine the accuracy of the information submitted and the effects that it'll have ultimately, both on adjacent properties again and the city and municipality roadways. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Sam Cooper, I'm a resident of Rehoboth Beach. Gentlemen, I was interested in Mr. Strange's comments about the constructability, and I'm open to this idea. I would like to see how you build these walls virtually on the property line without some sort of exterior shoring and stuff. But I had a particular question. When I looked at the plans on the internet, that was probably last month, but we're going to remove some of the city's stormwater filtration system off of Wilmington Avenue. And I was wondering what's going to be done to replace that functionality. Is that in the plans? Am I right?
Well, we will be glad to ask Mr. Forston or his representatives to respond, sir.
Okay. So I guess really the last thing I come down to is to come back to the off-street, the loading and unloading berth. To me, it's very clear, and I think, and there's been a very, to me, misinterpretation. The very beginning of section 270-36 says no building to be used in any district for the uses specified. It doesn't say any storefront or what have you. It says building. And I don't think anybody here would argue that these various retail occupancies are individual buildings. If so, the review under the building code would be hugely different. So I think to me, it's very clear that it's the building in which these things reside, not the individual spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, please state your name, please.
Alison Blythe.
All right.
And I'm the owner of 24 Rehoboth Avenue and Go Fish Restaurant. Adjacent property owner, obviously. So I'm closely following Dr. Trejo's presentations and documentation, and I've, obviously it's given me, great concern about the integrity of my building during all of this. That's one thing. The other thing is, and I want to state, obviously, I don't know that gentleman's name. Excuse me. What's your name? Jim? Jeff, okay. Hi, Jeff. I don't know if they let you know, but I am, and I want to make this clear to everyone, crystal clear. I operate my business 362 days a year. I've been there for 21 years, and I'm the adjacent property. And basically, the end game, if water were to come from the ocean, the whole length of my building. On top of that, I have a year-round residence upstairs, which is rented out 365 days a year. I myself live in there quite often. On top of that, I have people that have worked for me for years. My oldest employees worked for me for more than 30 years, and my business supports 6 families that depend on a weekly paycheck, which comes from business, people coming and sitting in my restaurant. So I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but when you said it's not going to affect nobody, we are not nobody. We're a business, and I talked to Peter about some of the other obstacles, which there are numerous obstacles for me, not just loss of business and the banging and the noise and everything else, many other things. And he's, don't worry, we can talk about this, we can talk about this. I haven't had one conversation with him, or actually anyone on this side, about how it's going to impact me and my business and my employees. So, it would be great if there was a go-to guy, such as yourself, who's going to help me live through this on a day-to-day basis for 2 years. So something has to be done. I'm not seasonal, and there are other businesses around there that are not seasonal as well. So I want to make that crystal clear, and I appreciate anything we can do to work together on this. And I'm really intrigued how you're going to allow, I'm going to be able to have customers come and sit in my restaurant and dine. I tried to put a certificate on the wall the other day with a nail and a hammer. Bang, bang, bang. People are looking around.
Ma'am.
So
ma'am,
I'm just,
Excuse me, ma'am.
I need to know how that's all going to play out for me.
Ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just need you
Thank
to
you.
direct your comments to the commission, please.
Okay, well, that's mostly it, but also, of
Oh,
course,
we
the
heard you,
building.
but I'm just
So,
saying, I think it'd
okay.
be more appropriate to address
Okay,
us.
all right. Well, I did, I just wanted to make sure that he was aware, that's
Oh,
all.
I think you made a
'Cause-
connection.
Yeah, I've made it crystal clear. Good, good. As
Thank
long
you.
as it's on the record, that's great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Members of the commission? We're adjourned.
Yeah, just waiting for that to go off.